Great, great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody this morning to our webinar, which is always amazing to be able to get to multiple people without necessarily having to be at a conference or trade show. So it's great to be here, and thanks to onOne Software for hosting it this morning. And might be afternoon for some of you because we are pretty much live worldwide for some people. But anyway, so the program today, this morning, is for me is designing creative press book covers and more. So any of you who are designing press books, I know a lot of both wedding and portrait photographers are involved right now with a lot of the major labs who are, the big buzz is creating some type of press product. And you know, it's kind of at first easy to perhaps purchase their templates, but you know, my direction is that we're working with the PhotoFrame is to use their products, and we've been able to go through, and the one that we use quite a bit is the PhotoFrame 4.6 software, and that enables us to be obviously more creative. Certainly as you're designing press products, the hard part is figuring out how to start with this, which we'll talk about. It's much faster, it's much quicker, and if you're doing multiple events like we are, we do quite a few weddings each year, tons of engagement sessions, so you know, time is money. We want to make this quick and easy, not having to reinvent the wheel every time we design something, and it's more consistent. We can always duplicate as well as create. So many times we want to create a different look, which, and you'll see in a few minutes, there's a huge library of all these choices, but certainly if there's some we want to replicate or make smaller versions of the product, we can do that consistently because we have it all in the library. And lastly, you know, basically it's creating higher sales for us. I mean, nowadays couples, wedding couples, families, etc., you know, they can order items online. So for us to be more creative as a photographer makes this more beneficial for us. And this is, we constantly say, look, we want to create something that they can't get online, something they can't, warehouse stores, if you all know what I'm talking about. So this is partially the #1 reason we're motivated by doing that. So just I'll show you just a couple quick images of my photography. Today we're going to obviously focus strictly on the designing of the layouts of the albums. I believe next month we'll be hosting a couple more webinars talking about using the other products in the onOne suite, having to do with photo frames in addition to photo tools, so as you can see some of the before and afters of our work. But mainly today we'll focus on the covers. As you can see, we do many weddings, many engagements, and we're always trying to come up with ways of sharing these photos, especially nowadays as digital photographers. You know, we take so many images, and it's like, what do we do with them? How do we get this across to our client so that they, you know, have something to put them in? So anyway, so let's move out of this tool section here. I'm just in Lightroom. Let's move out of this, and let's get to the actual production of this. So, and again, as Brian mentioned, if you have any questions, you can send him a little quick link there, and he'll get back to you. And at the very end, same thing. If you have any questions for me, just send those over. So we're going to start. I am using CS5, and basically, if you're using CS4, that's great. A lot of these things all apply to CS3 as well. But today I'm using CS5, so you'll see a variety of things. What I've got on the screen right now is just a couple quick samples. I'll X out some of one at a time, but you'll see as we go through here, we're basically created, whether it's for a press book, which we do a lot of guest books, whether it's an album where you're actually putting a photo on the cover, DVD cases, anything that some of these labs are producing as press products, we use. And this is, we're seeing like a guest book cover we've made basically using the photo frames. DVD cases is popular. And the other thing that I didn't post on here, but we do many, whether it's for a business card, whether it's for a postcard for a location or our own as well. So all these things apply as we build, I guess, graphically each of these different products. So we'll walk you through at least a couple stages here. And if you're even designing albums, wedding albums, even the you know, some of the inside products, we're using their textures and frames as well. So let's get started. Like I said, our main product that we're working on this morning is the PhotoFrame. And if you've already installed that in your computer, you'll notice that it docks very conveniently in CS5, and especially if you're using CS4 as well. But this is what we love about it, is the fact that I don't have to go outside of Photoshop. You know, I think all of us agree that we love doing our workflow. We're trying to make it quick, convenient, especially as we're doing a volume of images like we do. So you'll notice that everything is worked into Photoshop. And again, today we're going to focus on this PhotoFrame. So let's start out with a book cover. I've already set up an area here that has all this involved in here. So what I first want to comment is a couple quick things, because certainly designing a lot of these things, I think putting it mechanically together, we all kind of figure that out, but as far as the motivation, or let's say the inspiration of designing these things, so if any of you are building these, especially for us, we're building these for, let's say, for a wedding couple, whether it's for a parent album. In this case, I'm going to create a guest book for the wedding, I should say. And what we've done is we've created not necessarily templates, because we have different sizes already, but when I go into these templates, these are basically from some of the labs. So if you're dealing with any lab, most of them already have pre-made templates. And what I mean by these templates is not a template where the photos are already, where you're going to drop in, there's frames pre-made. These are just blank templates. So when I'm going to design an 8.5 by 11 book cover, you'll notice when I've downloaded this from a lab, you'll notice that it's blank. And I think that's the hardest part, right? When we create something, is trying to be inspired and say, well, what do we start with? And especially if you end up coming into PhotoFrame in a few minutes, you'll see that you're overwhelmed by this such enormous library. And for me, it's like a candy store, because we're like, wow, where do I start? So just a little quick tip that I always share with photographers, that obviously we end up with a blank canvas from any of your labs. You can certainly go up to new and build any size you want. But in this case, there's a couple labs that we use. And I download their templates for two reasons. One, you can see they already have preset guides, so that you're not, any text or anything that goes over that won't be cut off. You've even got the center point where it's going to be obviously folded, but mainly because they even have it in their color space. So those of you who are into producing these type of album covers from the labs, usually you might want to consult with the lab and find out what color space they're working in. If you can see up here on the top tab here, this is set up for an RGB, which came directly from the lab. Now, those of you who do any type of offset printing through whether it's a business card or postcard from other than some of the labs, then they're really changed their color space to a CMYK. So if you go up here to mode, it's very important if you are going to a press company, there's several online that do business cards, postcards, you got to make sure you change this for them, because then obviously you'll be in the correct color space. So that's a whole different topic, but today we're working RGB, and that's usually why this template, again, kind of secures that for us. So,
Hey,
anyway,
Frank.
so listen, yeah,
There's a
go ahead.
theme of questions. People would like to know if you can tell them which labs you recommend or what you use.
Okay, I knew they were going to ask me that question. Well, I use a couple different labs. I mean, certainly if you've gone to WPPI or Imaging USA, you'll see I love working with White House Color Lab. This is what this templates have come from. Miller's Color Lab does a great job with their press products as well, another facility we use, and even Pro DPI. So any of these labs, you can go to their press category, press product categories, and once again, you can download, as I mentioned, I do a lot of guest books, DVD covers, mini albums, you name it, even their business cards. So any of these products, you just download their templates, and again, we all can build the canvas from scratch, but I just like it because it's already got their parameters, it's got their color space, everything's working for it. So again, hopefully that helps you there. So this is downloaded from White House, and again, not that you would be able to tell, but certainly it has their color space, and that's important because now when I adjust my colors and text, everything involved here, it's all going to sync together, okay? But again, just a little FYI for, again, offset printing products for through usually professional print houses that aren't doing photography but doing postcards, you got to change that to a CMYK mode. That's very important as well. Okay, so again, please, any questions, just shoot those over to Brian. So here's the quick thing I want to mention. I just want to stop for 2 seconds. That the first question I get everywhere I go and do my seminars, well, how do you know which to pick? How do you know which backgrounds? How do you know which colors? This is where everybody gets hung up, and that's why sometimes we're the first to rush to buy some of these templates online. They're expensive and third-party products, but I usually ask my bride and groom, in this case, since it's a guest book at the wedding, I'll say, you know, what is the color of the wedding? You know, what's the bridesmaids' dresses? What's the flower colors? So once I know in advance, great, this is going to be, let's say, a green background, or it's going to be a red or burgundy. I think the one I've been showing lately is a burgundy. So what I will do is I'll say, okay, here, you'll notice over here in your layers palette, to start with this, I'll make a copy of that, Control J, Command J, obviously if you're PC and Mac, And what I'll do is I'll actually fill that with a color that I think the bride and groom likes. So if you go and fill that, let's go up to, you can basically either hit fill, edit, fill. Obviously, you can do the shortcut as well. And obviously, I'll decide whether, of course, quickly I can do black, I can do any color. But in this case, since they maybe said this is going to be a burgundy color, so I may come in here and kind of eyeball that. Now, another little tip is some of my brides will literally email me swatches. They'll send me swatches that I can scan. So, you know, if you're working with brides, you know, some can be a little bit more particular about some of these things. So, you know, whether I have a swatch or I have their color, not every couple is going to give you their RGB numbers or the CMYK numbers. So you're going to kind of have to get a good idea from asking them. But I'll go ahead and fill basically that layer. Now mine's a little reddish, it's fine, so just to give that information. So that's usually my first thought of what colors am I going to build this. The other hint that I do with our wedding couples is I'll ask them to maybe send me an invitation. And that invitation will usually have some adornments on there, some type of scrolls, flowers, some type of detail that also will allow me to say, okay, they like this style. Some couples are more contemporary, some a little bit more you know, older style, so we kind of get an idea by looking at that. So that's always my first tip for everybody when they're designing these things. So PhotoFrame, let's enter into PhotoFrame 4.6. You know, I fell in love with this once I saw that because remember, I'm making multiple albums each week. And anything to speed up my workflow, I'm all for. I mean, certainly I've had my share of downloading stock on the internet, building some of my own. It just takes way too long, especially the fact that we're trying to move forward. Now, what you're seeing here in front of me, and I can maximize this, but I'm just showing you it in the background, but it'll open up a screen with that red background. Now, you notice you have this whole library here that, like I said, to me, it's like a candy store. You've got so many options in here, and I always invite when you purchase this or you download this as a trial, you'll click through all of these. You'll go through each one, and for me, that's what I've done. I've clicked through every one of these many times, just seeing what kind of effects I can go through, okay? So I invite you to do that. Certainly there's some that will match what you're looking for. Now in this particular case, you know, I've worked a couple sections here. I can either work with their backgrounds that they're pretty much pre-made. They even have some composites that are pre-built, so if you're a senior photographer, doing high school seniors, something more contemporary, these are awesome to work with. And I usually tend to go more towards the elegant background. So I've worked with a couple of the pre-made ones from their gurus. Christy Melvare has been a very popular one of her backgrounds. And the secret here to these is that as you go through here, you don't want to be discouraged if you're not necessarily finding that color. Remember I said we want to go with a burgundy or red? That's okay, because what I'm searching for is the texture and the backgrounds, because I know in Photoshop and in PhotoFrame we can go through these blend modes in a minute and change the tones. So I'm purposely going to pick on the opposite color so you can see how this works. So if I build something like this, and let's say I want this texture on the left, okay, but it's not burgundy, right? Or even if I want a pink one, but I like those tones, simply just select one of those, because remember, I'm just searching just for the texture, and then I'll hit Add Frame. And what this is going to do is going to bring it into a different window. And I had my windows minimized earlier, so that's why they're so tiny here, so bear with me. And basically what you're seeing is now in a separate frame, this is what it looks like in front of us, okay? It's actually selected that. Hold on one second. Whoops, let's pop back in. I think we just lost that there. Hold on, guys. Let's bring that in. So what it's doing, it's going to bring it in a separate window. Let's do that one more time. Here we go. And let's go back to that, and I'll make that larger for us. I'm looking at a 30-inch display here, so I'm kind of cheating, right? I get to see this nice and large. And so, okay, here we go. So let's go down and pick that one more time. And what we're doing is we're adding that to that layer, that red layer that we did underneath, right? So what you're going to do is we're basically going to hit Add Frame one more time. And I promise I won't exit out of that again. Let's make this a little larger. Okay, and let's make this a little bit larger on the screen as I plus that up. So you've got two things to look at. One, you obviously can see here, you've got this image already placed on top of that red. So the great thing about this software is that it already allows us to do several things. If you look on this section, we can change the opacity. If we want to reduce the opacity, you can actually see that live right here. So you can either change this by the opacity of that. You can actually blur that if you want it a little bit blurred. You don't want to so pronounce some of the textures in there. You can blur it. So a lot of these things you can add in advance. Now even the blend modes that you have in Photoshop in your layers palette are also an option. Take a look at that. So you also have blend options here. So this way you can either wait to go into Photoshop or you can actually do it here. So many times if I'm not sure what type of blend mode I want, I may keep it on normal. That's my workflow because I know I can do that right here in Photoshop. That's why I kept Photoshop kind of displayed underneath so I can kind of go back and forth for it. So as easy as this is, you also notice I can stack effects. And so many times if I want to add a texture to this or a scratch look, I can still do that, but I usually do baby steps. I try not to add everything at one time because I'm not sure the look I want yet. So what I'll do is I'll hit apply, and what this will do now is it's going to basically select that layer for us. It's going to select that background that we've chosen. It's going to tell Photoshop, we want it to pick the right dimension, so you don't have to worry about resizing it properly. PhotoFrame knows exactly how to resize that for us. So once it comes in here, also the great part of this is it's actually puts it on a separate layer for us. If you notice here on the right-hand side, it's on a separate layer, so it's not affecting here, why that allows us now to use, if you can see here on the right, it now allows us to use our Photoshop blend modes. So you can literally cycle through that you want. Now the shortcut is if you hold down the Shift key and you hit minus and plus, you can cycle through all your blend modes. Now I have to tell you, I love to cycle through all the blend modes, okay? So yeah, I'm one of those people that I like to look to see what each of these blend modes do. So I'm just hitting the plus key, holding my Shift key down, and cycling through all these blend modes. Okay, look at that. That looks pretty cool. So it's endless what you can do, and every book that we create is always a little bit different. And really just by cycling through not only the blend modes, but obviously that underlaying color, obviously that I've already pre-selected. Now real quickly, if you ever find yourself that you still want to change that, your client wants to change that color, you still have that option. That's why I kept this on a separate layer. I didn't fill my base layer because now if I ever want to back that off a little bit, I can lower the opacity on that. So I'm always trying to keep every selection that I do on its own layer. This way you still have that option, okay? So let's stick with this one for now. Now the next step that I usually will do is eventually I'm going to get to adding a photo on top of this, but for now, again, you say to yourself, well, do you like the way this looks? Do you like, is it too sharp for you? Do you want to add a little more texture? Well, many times I find myself, because I have the library of so many images in here and so many backgrounds, I find myself stacking images, stacking textures. So as I mentioned earlier, certainly I have that option of stacking in that photo frame, but I don't know that until I come back here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, make sure you select that layer, your top layer, and I'm going to go back into photo frame. Let's just add for the fun, let's just add one more layer to this. The reason I like to do that is because this way it adds more depth to it. I don't want it to look like it's just a one-dimensional, two-dimensional flat piece of artwork. I like to add to it. So whether you want to add, you can see now where there's different scratch film version. Many times I'll go into all these different ones. I'll even use, lately I've been using some of the metals. And that's great because you can look through here. You can see now it's kind of grunged it up a little bit. Now, not everything that you do needs to be grunged, but if you want to just kind of make it so it looks not so perfect, and I invite you to kind of cycle through all these. You notice what it's done here. Each one has different effects. Now, here's the other great thing is they've allowed us a preview here in PhotoFrame to even change that to white. Some of the textures will look great on different backgrounds, and then you can still cycle through your blend modes, but that's what it looks like in the white. But for now, I'll stick with the black because I really want kind of like that scratch look or a grunge look. So again, there's many times I'm using more objects in the library versus just kind of going straight to the scratch look. So it just depends what kind of look you want, and some are more subtle than the other. Again, as you click through all this, you'll notice. I've used this paper one as one of my favorites as well. You'll notice it's added kind of like more of a linen texture. So if I double click that, or any of these, you double click it or hit obviously apply. You notice now it's added this on there. You can obviously notice as I come up here on top, you can toggle that off and you can see that in advance. Now you see it's kind of added that. So it's just adding depth to it. It's just not a flat object. So once I hit apply, again it'll pull that background for us, that texture. It'll tell Photoshop once again what size that should be. That's the great part. We don't have to think about that, and there's a lot of background and textures you may try to buy that if the file size is not large enough, certainly you'll have an issue with that. All right, so now we're in there. We're right inside, back into Photoshop. I'm going to close that out. Now at this point, I want to add a photo to this. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll open up on a separate layer whatever the couple had selected. Let's say they selected a photo to go on the cover. Let's pick on a wedding photo here. I've got tons of them here. And we'll basically select any of the photos, whether it could be a single photo, multiple collage of it, can be anything we want. So I think I picked on this one last time. I showed several different ones, but I'm going to pick on this one. So here's that image. And by the way, you notice on Photoshop how it always docks here. You can always go to the preferences and change that. So if you're used to CS4, CS3, where obviously that it doesn't do that, you can change that in the preferences. But now we're on a separate layer. We're totally separate, actually separate document. We're not in the layer that's in the background. Now we want to add a frame to this, and that's another popular thing for me as well. Let me get this out of the way here too. I like to move this out of the way. There we go. And let's see, did I just lose my photo? Hold on one second, guys. I always do that. Let's pull that up. There we go. All right, so here we go. So one of my favorite things also is certainly I can drag that image on top of that separately. You notice it's asking me for my color space. I can drag that separately, okay? Obviously, I've dragged it here in the bottom. Let's make sure it's up on top. And I can add it there. But one of the beauties of PhotoFrame is that it lets us use some other frame. So let's remove that. Let's go back into that image, and let's add a frame on here. And a lot of times when we do this, I too don't know what kind of frame I want to use. I go into the library, again, trying to surf through all the different ones. There's a section here that says frames. And obviously if you're into the type of traditional mats, traditional framing, all these things are available to you. But lately for us, it seems like the vintage style is in. And so if you go down to the photographic section here, you notice you'll have a lot of different frames, both some that look like more like a slide film, some that look like Polaroid transfers on the edges. But once again, you have to kind of go through. I like some of the instant film. A lot of the instant film kind of looks like it's either old 4x5 days. Right now, Polaroids are still kind of popular, so I'll go like this SX70 style. That's very popular. So again, I always invite you to do that. And by the way, some of the things that are already kind of torn and all that, we can still add texture later on. So in this case, I've been using this one just because I like the kind of that look. So what you do is you just hit Add Frame. It's quite simple. It's very easy to use. And you can either make adjustments. You notice here in the corner, you can either make adjustments here to kind of bring that out. But since this is going to come back on a separate layer for me, I can still make that adjustment. Okay, I can still make the adjustment. I can still reduce in Photoshop the image in the background, make it smaller to fit a little bit more precise. Once again, you've got your blending options. So if you want it to blend in the background, you want to blend underneath the frame, you can always invite everybody to kind of cycle through those. Certainly same with your opacity, but I'm going to bring this back into Photoshop, and what it's going to do is same thing. It's going to bring in on a separate layer that SX70 frame, and you'll notice my photo will still remain on a separate layer, so I can still make any enhancements or retouching on there, so you don't feel like you're stuck with that. Let me make this a little bit larger for you guys. So you notice I still got some black edges there. And you notice here on the right side, see it's the photos on a separate layer, and so is the frame. So just by hitting Control-T or Command-T and holding my shift so I don't distort that object, I'll come down and do that. And I can kind of just change that around to fit exactly where I want that. So you can see this is very easy to do, okay? So then next what we'll do is let's now bring that on top. So you can either drag all these layers on top if you think you're going to want to move that frame around, or you can just flatten it there if you don't think you're ever going to move that. Usually for simplicity, I'll flatten it and I'll bring that right back over onto that document. So let's close out this section because we don't need this anymore. Okay, let's close that out. And then now we're back into that frame. Okay, so now earlier I was in here. Let's fix this here because I was kind of moving stuff around. There we go. And make sure you're on the right layer. You see that image is there. So what I normally do, so let's go back here. Oh, I'll show you why we're doing that. I'll give you a little quick tip here too, by the way. Notice up here on this top section, I'm in the Move tool, by the way. So let me get a little Photoshop tip. I'm in the Move tool. And what's happening is I've selected Auto Select. Usually when I do wedding albums, any layer that I touch, obviously it'll move on its own. I don't have to hit the Control or Option key. It'll do that. So if you check that, that'll let you move several photos on there. If not, obviously you have to come back in here and then select the layer on this side. So that's a quick shortcut. If you turn that on, and even the control points, if you turn that on, you'll notice your image will have the control points accessible at every time too. So I always invite people doing wedding albums with multiple images on page. That's a very good shortcut to know. All right, so let's go back here. We're going to actually reduce this image kind of the traditional way that you guys are used to. Let me just make sure I straighten my background again. There we go. All right, just a normal way with a transform. Okay, we're going to transform this image, and very simple. Same thing most of you do probably already. You're going to move your images around. This is basic, as you guys know. There's hundreds of ways of adding these. Sometimes I'll do multiple effects. I'll duplicate these images, and let's hold on. Let's make a little copy right here of that. You'll know sometimes I'll do 2, 3 images, and the reason I'll do that is sometimes I'll move it around. Look like there's a whole series of Polaroids in the background. I'll kind of fade it out. Now, the other thing that I've done that's one more step of this whole process is that certainly eventually we're going to add their name. You know, eventually if you, with your text tool, you're going to come down here and just put their names, okay, because obviously you want to personalize that. Let's pull up that, make sure you guys can see that. There we go, make sure we got the right size. So certainly that's what we'll do, and obviously I want to make sure that we're in the right layer. You can see it's real tiny there. Now that's one thing, that's the same thing. I mean, everybody adds text to it, but what I'm going to do in a few seconds, let's take this on the very top, make sure it's not going to be hit by any influence of everything, is make sure that when we do this, it's on the very top layer, because we're going to keep adding textures to this, okay? We're going to keep adding textures to these layers eventually, and we don't want to contaminate that. So let's move this here. Okay, let's see where we put that there. Let's pull this back out again. There we go. Perfect. Okay, and then actually I'm going to move this up. Sorry about that. There we go. There it is. Okay, and it'd help if I remember their name. All right, here we go. Perfect. And we type this correct. There, that's why I'm used to using I'm using a Wacom tablet, by the way. So if any of you that are constantly working on enhancing of images, you know, certainly we always invite people to use that. It's a little bit easier to paint in than it is for trying to use a mouse to do that. Okay, so this is quite simple here. Now usually what I do, once I build this whole thing, I'm still never satisfied, because I think the key thing is that now it looks like I just threw a Polaroid on here. It looks like I just threw it on top. It looks like a basic cutout. Certainly, again, the background, I've added a little extra texture. I can still darken it. I'm still on separate layers, but ultimately what I like to do is I like to usually come back at the very top layer and go back into my photo frame and maybe add just one more dimension to it. I want to kind of seal all these together. I don't want to keep them in the same thing, right? So what I'll do is, hold on, let's put it here on the, there we go. Sorry, I think I'm on that text layer. Well, what I want to do is I want to pick something that allows me to kind of tie that all together. So let me get back off for 1 second. I want to make sure I'm up here on the top. Okay, there we go. What I want to do is I want to do one more texture that'll kind of lay on this whole thing so that it ties it together, because right now it looks like you just pasted it together. So many times I'll go back into this library, and I'll do this quickly because I think the last demonstration I've been doing, I've been picking on some of the different harder color backgrounds, whether it's metal, fabrics, any artistic media they have, and I picked on some of the really hard grunge look because I'm really only using just the texture of it. So I picked on this one, and I'm going to hit add frame, and you'll notice again that it's where it's sitting at. So again, by changing, a few minutes you'll see by changing blend modes, I'm going to have that up on a separate layer. Let's make sure I'm on the right one. Let's take it into Photoshop. You'll see I can change the blend mode. And what that allows us to do is, I'm trying to put this on top of the whole image. So now that it allows us to add the effect on top of the Polaroid. Again, you got to be careful that you're not on top of your separate text if you want to grunge that out. But now that it's on the top, you can see it spreads across. Now look what it's done to the Polaroid. And to me, that's a great effect, because now it doesn't look like I just pasted it on there, right? So you notice I have that texture on a separate layer. So obviously what I would do is, you have two choices. You can either do a erase tool, which is a very destructive approach of editing, because if you want to go back and change or add it, that's not good. So I will still end up, because of separate layers, I'll add a mask to it. And if you hit the X key, X will cycle through your front colors there. So since we're on a white mask, we'll hit the black, and we'll hit B as your shortcut for brush. And basically come back in, and I'm just doing this kind of quickly there, is I'll paint out obviously the texture in areas that I don't want. Now some people, you'll see some people that'll talk about with texture, they can use they'll take Gaussian blur and they'll blur out the texture. That's another shortcut, but it's pretty straightforward if you're able to just create a mask. I think those of you who are Photoshop junkies like I am, you'll know that that's pretty much the beauty of Photoshop is you've got masks and layers, and that's what allows us to do that. So I'm doing this kind of quickly here, but now you'll notice that now your particular whole 3, 4 textures, layers, etc. now is all tied together, and it doesn't look like you just kind of slapped a few photos. And I think that's kind of the difference between our books when people look at them and they'll say, wow, this looks like you spent some hours doing this, and you can see I did it quite quickly. Okay, so that's one of our favorite things. Now, one other spin-off here before I get into an album, wedding album page is, let's say for a lot of our couples, you saw that I will build like a DVD case for them. Remember, this is their colors of the wedding. I'll build maybe a separate, smaller books for the parents. And, we did spend some time, obviously, building this, right? So it's not like it was a couple minutes here. So what I'll do is let me hide the guides. If you hit Control or Command-H, I'm going to hide the guides. And what I'll do, let's say that we're done with this. Usually I'll save this as a PSD. I'll save this, put it away. Then sometimes I'll make me a copy of that. There's just a little quick workflow. What I'll do is sometimes what I'll do is I'll hit Duplicate, okay, for myself. And there's a duplicate layer in front, or a copy. And what I'll do is I'll save this. Now, since it's for demonstrations, I'll throw it away, but I'll save this PSD in case I want to come back and move it around. But for sake of this, I'm just going to say no. So on my copy of this, I'm going to flatten this layer. Now, many times I want to use this to go into the album as the texture and backgrounds. So what I'll do is if I don't need the photo, I can turn that off. If I don't need that, certainly I don't need the text here, right? I can turn that off as well. So hide that, but I want to use this for the inside of my album. So literally, I can use this, whether it's a single-sided, I can use this whole page, I can paste that. So what I'll do is I'll literally come over here and I'll flatten the image, discard all the, see where it says discard hidden layers, I'm going to say yes because I don't need that. So now I can use this. So whether I use this as the full spread, a lot of these press books are individual pages. They don't do full spreads. So literally what I'll do, if I turn the guide on, I can take my marquee tool, that's M is the shortcut on there, and I can come in here like this and basically right click on it and do layer via copy, okay? And then what I'll do is if I go back into those templates, whatever lab you're using, you usually have a whole box of templates of all sizes. I'll come back in there and let's look for my template folder. Here we go, perfect, templates. And let's say here now we have I want to build a DVD case, okay, a DVD case. I can hit open. And basically now all I have to do is basically copy, okay, copy that on top of this. All I have to do is literally go back to this document, hit the V for your move tool, and that copy I made, and just bring that right on top of that. Now this would be made for a DVD case. Now this certainly, if this had been for the actual pages in the album, many times what I'll do is for the album is I'll make, whether it's an 8.5 by 11 is usually the inside sheet, is I'll get an 8.5 by 11 blank canvas, do exact procedure, and then I'll copy this here. Okay, now this is for a DVD case, so I'm going to just stretch that a little bit here just to fit the edges to that. Now, the reason this works so well for me is because, remember, we've already went out of our way to make sure that the bride and groom, we've picked their colors, we've spent some time building this. Now I can do this for my DVD case. But if this is going to be for the inside the album, let's say this is now the pages, later on I can come back in here and then let's say this is a full page. I can edit this. I can obviously lower the opacity. Certainly I can come in here if I just want to do a little cutouts. I can come in here like this, and maybe make its own frame in there. I just hit marquee tool, made a frame, hit the delete key. I can drop photos in there if I want to. So you can use this as the pages that goes into the album now. But usually I'll lower the opacity on here so that it's not so copy, I guess, of the cover of the actual album. So that's how I move on to keep making these. So whether I use a template for a mini album, whether I use it for any of those other products, I can kind of match it. So again, this way it kind of matches the theme of what they're doing. And I invite you to, like I said, if you go to any of the labs, you'll notice, again, and I just selected just a few that I'm demonstrating, but you'll notice that I'll go through and download each one of those, whatever I'm selling to our customer, and then we have them made. Now, someone asked me earlier too, well, can't you just save these as a template? Sure. I mean, obviously I can save this as I save the PSD, and I can reuse this later on. So if you really like that theme, you can keep using it. But the beauty of the onOne is that I don't have to rethink anymore. I can go back. Usually they'll be listed of what's the name of each one, so you can go back and then select that. Okay? All right, so let's close out of this. And once again, if you have any questions about that, but it's very simple. And the beauty of this is very quick. That's really the main thing that I always want to talk about. So let's do, I think we have a few minutes too. I want to do another thing with wedding albums on the inside of albums, okay? Because many times, you know, we're building wedding albums. Certainly we're using just white backgrounds, black backgrounds, but I love to take advantage of textures adding on to that, okay? So what I'm going to do here is just pick a blank layer here. I'm going to pick let's say my normal wedding album may be 11 by 14 horizontal, so that's like 28 inches wide, 11 inches tall. Again, you can do any size of album that you want. And in most cases, let me hit the Command or Control R brings in my guides. Here is basically your two-spread album. So in other words, if I'm doing a wedding album and you cut it in the middle like that, this is your wedding album. So what I'll do many times is same with the albums. If you're using leather-bound style albums, certainly you're not designing covers for leather albums. But a lot of photographers looked at my insides of my album and said, how are you getting the textures and the same design work inside there? So let me show you a little quick way how I do some of those in these albums. Now, typically when we do an album layout, you'll end up with many photos, obviously in a folder that the client has selected. And we'll lay out, obviously, boxes on the right of 2 or 3 images, boxes on the left of several images. But this one, I'll show you what I did here. So what I love about a lot of the images in today, you know, certainly we're not working on before and afters of images, but sometimes I've already added textures and so on to this. Let's drag this on top of here and bring this over this way for me. And what I'll do is a lot of times I'll try to do 2 things. I can either add textures obviously on my images, but people ask me, what about the pages? How can we add a little more dimension? So many times what I'll do is the same thing, is I'll do a Control J, Command J, and what I'll do is I'll fill that as well. I'll fill that. Now you can leave it white if you like, but here in this case I want to add a little color to it. You can certainly pick from any of these, black, white, etc. But let's add a little color. And what I'll do is I'll sample usually from within the photo. Remember, everything that I do is always based on if this couple, this is the color of their flowers, maybe there's backgrounds. I'm always sampling just to match it. And that's the uniqueness of being a professional graphic artist, professional photographer. You have the skills to kind of go beyond just everything is template driven. I try to go out of my way to create uniqueness of everything we do. So here I try to blend that and match that together, right? So now what I normally do is say, well, you can either add more images on this side, but many times, remember, I'm using the PhotoFrame collection, and I'm always wondering what can I do to add a little more dimension so it looks different. So normally what I'll do is I'll come here, and let me back. I want to see if I have a solid yellow one. I was using one earlier as a demonstration with a solid yellow one. Let me just see here for 1 second. Okay, let me use this one because it works better with my texture. So let me remove this because I've added texture here, and I don't want to replicate that. So let me delete this, if you guys bear with me. And let me just go grab that one that doesn't have texture because it's kind of, I usually don't put texture on texture and texture that's not matchy on albums. So let's pick on this one. You'll see why. Okay. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm going to drag that back on there again, just like this, and you'll see why in a minute. And usually in this case, I keep it like this. And now what I'm going to do is let's go back and redo this to match it because that's important. I want to make it look kind of seamless as possible. And the same thing, you'll sample a color. Whoops, I keep doing that. Let's sample the color so it kind of matches. Okay, kind of matches somewhere in between there. And I'll hit OK. Now, here we go. Now we got a blend here. Now the only thing that I needed to do that I did earlier is I needed to fix this here earlier. Okay, I think on my sample I kind of just did a little quick fix on this one. I went in here on this section here, kind of took made a mask on it, and took my brush and kind of came in here and just cleaned that up a little bit. See that? So I'm just doing it quickly. I walk up to, I can mask her out, which I normally would. I'd mask that out, but for sake of that, and I'll even kind of blend it sometimes. If I think the color's a little bit too with my mask, I can come in there and kind of blend that in a little bit. Okay, but once again, it's something you can do. I will either mask them out if the color's too off, but just for sake of that, I did that. Okay, so now you can see there we are with that. Now the other thing I want to do now, remember talking about those textures in an album, leather-bound albums, you're normally not going to do a photo cover like we just did on our press products. But I still went to add that same flair to it. So what I'll do is I'll go back into PhotoFrame, and once again, going through, clicking through all of them, kind of getting an idea of feel of what's in the library. That's important. I kind of wanted to go with a real elegant look. So I went back into same thing. I've clicked through these. I went into one of the gurus. This time I went on one of Vicky Toffer's ones and one of her, still one of her backgrounds. Now remember we talked about earlier, oops, am I on top? Let's do something real quick, hold on. Give me 1 second. What I'm going to do just for sake of that, let me cancel for a second. I'm going to bring this down, hold on 1 second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge that down. It's either Command or Control E. I'm going to keep those together. That's so that I don't have that mask in my way. All right, let's do that one more time. Now what I'm doing here is a lot of times is I'm just searching for a texture or a background to go in here. So I really remember we talked about earlier, it all has the same theory. We're not really worried about the actual color because we can change that later. So I'm going to pick a background that I really liked, and I think it was down here. I think I picked on, let's see here, one of the many colors. Let's pick on, let's see, of course I always like to pick on the ones the opposite color. Let's pick on this bottom one. So I'm going to pick on this one here. So I'm going to hit Add Frame. And same thing, you see how this is the beauty here is I can, if I didn't like this, remember I said earlier I waited to Photoshop to change the blend mode, but what's great here is that this lets me now see this live. So if I didn't like the way this looked on the background, I can say, you know what, maybe I didn't like this after all, maybe I didn't like the way it looked. Then I can go back and change that, see? So this gives you a little demo in advance that if you didn't like those modes, the texture itself, you could go back and open the library. All I'd have to do is hit Open Library, and I can come back in here and hit another one. Okay, select another one, hit Add Frame, come back and test it. Same thing. Let's say I wanted something a little more bohemian style, and say you wanted that same thing. I can go through and cycle through here, and if it matches the wedding theme, the colors, you can go through that. Okay. So what I did though, I think I picked one of these other ones. I kind of like more of that curly Q. Let's see if you can cycle through here again, and it doesn't matter what color it is, right? It doesn't really matter as you go through. It really doesn't matter what color, because you know we can change all of that, right? So when you select this, another quick tip too is that again, I'm always finding out whether or not that the colors, I knew that. I want to know what their themes are. I don't want anything that's too, again, high school senior looking, so to speak, because it may not match. So let's go back in and add this. Now you notice what I've done here. You see how it's built it up in layers on this top section. So certainly some of the ones I already previewed, you can just hit the minus key, okay, which obviously I could have done earlier, and then now it ended up with the one that I really like. So that's another little shortcut. You can add some and plus here as well. So instead of going back to the library, I just wanted to show you how to go back. Now you hit Apply, same thing. Now this is going to tell PhotoFrame, once again, it gives them the dimension of the canvas that you created, so you never have to worry about that. And it's going to set this up on a separate layer, and now I can take advantage of adding frames, textures, and on I believe next month I'm doing a program where we'll be adding these effects on images, how we've taken images that are quite simple and kind of add a little more dimension to it. And but for now we're adding this onto frames. So here you go. You see you've got your separate layer. Come back and cycle through all your blend modes. Remember hitting that shift key or minus to blend through that. You can multiply. You just go through and see what you want. A lot of times I'm kind of doing these a little softer, a little bit softer. I don't sometimes want this to overpower. Usually soft light is very light. If you go to hard light, obviously it's a little rougher on the texture, but usually between overlay and soft light, it'll add that. Now, as you all know, working with textures, same thing. You add your layer mask on there. Make sure your foreground is obviously the opposite of that. And same thing, carefully with my Wacom brush, I'll go through carefully and same thing, remove those areas that we don't need on a texture. And this way, you know, it's not kind of contaminating that. But the secret to this, again, is just cycling through each of the blend modes, because every background is going to be a little bit different. Every texture is going to be a little bit different. And certainly, if it's too pronounced for you, you know, you have an option of either fading this back out. That's why we have that base layer. So if the texture, the background is a little bit too rough for you. And I've even do a separate blur layer. I mean, I can go back here, obviously in Photoshop. That's what I like about this, is I can still stay on this layer. I can go up to one of the filters. I can use any of my filters here. I can blur that out if I wanted to. So certainly there's options of changing this effect to your liking, because again, I've looked at albums that I thought looked great on certain ones. I looked at some other people's albums that I thought was a little bit too much. But again, with this one, you can obviously change whatever you want to do, but certainly give it a try. And now when I build a wedding album, you've got a kind of unique page. Now here you go. Here's your, I'm just putting in the middle here, and then I can come in build onto this here, and you've added a background. Now, if you're doing wedding albums, yeah, we've used certainly photos as backgrounds. We've all seen people faded photos in the backgrounds, but you have to remember, you know, when wedding couples are visiting multiple photographers, the investment I made with PhotoFrame to say, you know what, I want to create a different look for anything that I do. So not everybody's going to like certain frames and backgrounds, but I promise you when you show these samples, this is a secret here, this is a tip. Make lots of samples. I make a lot of before and afters on my photography because even though you know how to do it and you can communicate with them, but unless they see these samples, it's really difficult for them to kind of get a vision of what you're doing. In fact, again, if you tune in to, I think next month we're doing some before and after of our images, and that's what we show. Here's one that we feature. This is kind of a wedding we featured before. You notice where we've done before and afters with using the photo frames and photo tools. So next month we'll be talking about that. But again, I just show these before and afters, whether it's the albums, DVD covers, albums that we do, and they're all always amazed. And I think all of us know that's the bottom line, right? Here's another one I build. I mean, every one that I build, let's get out of this. I'm going to cancel this one out. Don't save. And by the way, you can save those. I've created a little collection of these PSDs with minus the photo, of course. And I've actually created my own little backgrounds that I created in onOne because there's some that I really loved. And yeah, I can go back and quickly do it, but I'll use it for several things. But again, if you tune in, here you go. Next month you'll see that as well. See what we've done here using the onOne products where, you know, we're using some other textures. They don't have to be floral like I was playing with. Obviously, we love using the focal point. It's a great, that's one of my favorite products to kind of everything bringing the attention to the bride and groom, so you'll see that. But today we're just applying that on there. Here's another one I just made quickly last night, and again, it's like endless. We keep making more and more of these. Every time I go into onOne, I seem like I'm making a different one, and I'll keep it blank. Like here's one I made. Take a look at this one just in that little quickly as you load. See this one here? And what I'll do is even on taking like this section here, you notice this one, I've added a texture just on top of that. This was just a plain, there we go. See, that was just a plain green background. Because you got to remember, your clients see this online. It's solid colors, but what I've done is literally knowing that I've added texture to it, adds a little more dimension to it. This background also had multiple layers to it. The background, if I pull down here, take a look if I cycle through this. If I turn that off, look at where I started. Remember we talked about the base layer for our clients because that's the color of their event. So you'll notice where I build this all up. I've added a little bit of a metal. See what it says here? So what I love about this will remind me what I use because many times I'm clicking through here and I too forget unless I write it down what I'm actually doing here. But notice how it's got the list of what you used. I've added a background to it, and then I went back and added some more texture to it. See how it's all kind of put it together? And by having these on layers, remember, you still have the beauty of controlling that. So if it's a little bit too dark for you, a little bit too light for you, you still have that change for that. So it keeps it in its own categories. And then obviously I've added additional frame here. You'll notice right here, this is that photo frame, another one I've added. So I saved this because later on, lastly, if I save this, I can come back, bring an image in, create a clipping mask, and drop my image right into this. So all I have to do to customize this is add the text for somebody, put maybe their wedding date on here. Don't forget, by the way, to put your logo in the back, okay? So that's something I do every time here. That's kind of mandatory. I'll usually keep a logo on my desktop like this, and basically every time, let's pull this out, and I'll import that. So that's kind of mandatory. I always say you make sure you put your logo because when they put this at the reception, basically, there you go. So I keep a logo at all times, and so that way every product, whether again business cards, whatever we're doing, it all has our logo on there. So very important because you're trying to show off that you created this, and that's how you get advertising. I know it's something we've all heard to make sure you put your logo on that, but even on my wedding proofs, we're always stamping our images on there to do that. So I'll just show you one last image here, and again, if you have any questions about that, it's really endless, as you can see that when I sit creating these ones, I think I never really sit there and know what colors or backgrounds I'm going to use or textures yet. I just kind of if you're a designer or you're a graphic artist, we all know that we get inspired somehow. And so that's one of my number one keys as we're building these is that, sometimes we're inspired by just asking the people, the couple, whoever you're working with, what are their colors, what are goals on this item, and whether it's a wedding invitation, their wedding program, whatever it is, we're always inviting couples to share that with us. This way, when I sit down and design this, you know, we're not in the dark and trying to figure out what we do. But here's another one I just built for another guest book. Totally opposite of the really fancy, ritzy-looking one. This is one I'm using the wood background in the PhotoFrame library. Again, same thing, using some of the tabs. Some of these I'll create in Photoshop, some of the effects of that, but ultimately, same thing. Every one that I've done is a little bit different. But again, once again, I invite you to click through them, look at each one of them. Again, even some of them I've made for backgrounds. This is the same thing. I've used this that's going to go in the album as just a blank page, and I can fade and add images. So I invite you to go through the library and just click around and look at it. But ultimately, you end up creating great images that your clients are going to pay you for it, because certainly if it looks like everybody else's, it's kind of hard for them to kind of pay the big bucks, as we say, when they can get it either less expensive or uncreative somewhere else. So once again, I think we're almost through here. I'll leave a couple minutes for any questions. Brian certainly, I'm sure, has been asking questions about these covers, but everything I've done today is done in the PhotoFrame 4.6. And any of the other effects like darkening images and so on is usually done directly underneath here. You'll see the other software we're using for image work is done right here in the Photo Tools category. So thank you for listening. Any quick questions? I'll be here for a couple minutes. And again, thanks for listening.
Yeah, Frank, thanks so much. That was a really fantastic job. There were actually a lot of times when we do these Pro Series webinars and I watch on, like, we'll have someone like Jim DeVitale do them with us, and I pick up tips just by watching, like things that I didn't really ever think about. So it was really, really great. There was one question I thought was really good by Michael, where he asked, and this is not a technical question, this is more of a, you know, based on your experience and style, but so you design a cover of a book, so the book has pages. What is your recommendation in terms of the deviation from the design of the cover? Like, do you make it so that all of the pages are relatively the same theme, or do you have one page is red, one page is yellow, one page is blue, this texture, that texture?
Yeah, very good question, Michael. Very good question, and that's a question I ask myself when I sit here and design these things. Is that, yeah, that cutout page that I did earlier is because sometimes I will use that sometime as the last page, or maybe a first page, but normally I'm going to deviate from that by either putting a black frame around that so you only see hints of it. Fading is obviously another option. Also, I like to sometimes use not necessarily the exact cutout, but you know that the texture that I used, that texture can be applied on top of colors. Now the colors that you talked about, how would you pick colors for the inside? Typically I don't try to go through and make the whole album different colors. So come up with a theme. So if the let's say the cover was brown and we threw textures, you not necessarily need to put the same cover inside, but maybe I'm going to have the same brown tones on the page. So if the photo is floating on its own, you can see the background, maybe there'll be brown underneath. So I'm always keeping the same color scheme in the album, but not necessarily that exact same texture on every page, because to me that'd be a little bit too repetitive. So if I use it once in the album, that'd be too much, but I really will either pull out, you see how I added 2 or 3 layers of textures, I could pull out 1 or 2 of those, maybe keep it just a little a scratch film look on the brown, and then use that in maybe half of the book. But certainly I don't keep it repetitive. I'll do a lot of bleed photos, so the photos are bled to the edge. I think clients like that. But yeah, very good question. It's just, I would just say definitely keep the same color scheme.